how can we have, I mean, Asha, how can we have Michael's image focus better?
That's on Michael's end.
No, there's no, it's the only image that doesn't automatically focus. Okay.
Okay, we have. Okay, so I know you missed a little bit, Jay, but we're fortunate that yes, we finished a sugya, but we're starting at a new Mishnah.
Yeah.
So if you want to hear the previous discussions the last couple of weeks, you can do that, but it doesn't directly impact on us, so I don't really want to spend too much time. But it was an interesting discussion, and again, what's going on here is that once we established the principle of Neshech and Tarbis, and we know Midoraisa, Midrabanan, the Gemara then sort of layers on top of the basic principles circumstances that could be construed or are ribbis that aren't traditional. It's not a loan. Okay, the loan is the traditional ribbis. Okay, you do business as traditional ribbis, but to present circumstances that might otherwise not even be viewed as ribbis and suggest that they are ribbis. That's what these Mishnahs and Gemara are telling us. So on Samach Hey Omid Beis, a couple of lines from the top, Samach Hey Omid Beis, there's a Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Mochalo es hasodeh. If I sell you a field, Jay, I have a field and you're interested in it, I sell you the field. But you don't have the money to buy it. You have some money. V'notzalon mixus domim, you give me, so to speak, a down payment of the price. The price could be 1,000 zuz, and you have 100 zuz. So you give me 100 zuz, v'omalo, and I say to you, I'm the seller, and I say to you, Emisai shetirtza hava maos v'tol es shel cho. Whenever you have the money, give it to me. No timetable, open-ended. Emisai, when? Shetirtza, whenever you want. Come back, give me the rest of the money, and the field is yours. Very straightforward. Osir. Says the Mishnah, this is Osir. You can't do this. We'll see in a minute why. But you're asking here, at least at face value, and since we're talking about ribbis, what's ribbis here? I mean, at least in thinking about it, where's their ribbis? Okay, I sell you the field. You give me some money. You're going to give me the rest of the money when you can, and that's it. Okay, so we're going to get to that in a minute. Now, contrast that with the second half of the Mishnah, which says, Helvo al Sadeu, I make a loan to you. You have a field, and you give me the field as security. So my security is your field, and I've made you a loan. Okay. V'omalo, and then I, who are lending the money, say to you, Im i'ata noselim mikam v'shloshim shonim. Now, notice, there is a timetable here. If you don't consummate this transaction from today and to 3 years, because I give you 3 years to buy the field, and if you don't buy it in 3 years, harihu shali, it's mine. All right? So different circumstance. Harihu shalo, says the Mishnah, it does belong to him. Now, the question is, the field may be worth far more than 1,000 zuz. Let's say the field is worth 2,000 zuz. And he gave him the collateral, and he was very comfortable with the collateral. And he said, I'll take your collateral. I mean, loans like this are made all the time. And but you have to pay me within 3 years. So 3 years come and go. And now he says, it's my field. And the borrower is saying, wait a minute, this field is worth far more than the loan. At least pay me the difference. I mean, I have a field for 2,000. I owe you 1,000 or a little bit less than 1,000. What's going on? Says the Mishnah, Harihu Shalo. It belongs to the lender. V'chein haya, and so it was, B'yisos ben Zunin osa. So Baisis Ben Zunin was an individual that the Gemara focused on, and he said he used to make transactions like this, al pi chachamim, by the word of the chachamim. In other words, he consulted with chachamim, bezin, whatever, and they said, yes, you can do it. Now, what's the pshat here? If you make an open-ended loan, and then we say that you can't make such a transaction, and basically you have to give him back the money. He gave him, let's say, 100 zuz out of 1,000, and so he's not the owner of that field, okay? So you can't do it, but yet if you have a clear-cut deal where the instructions are precise, then that you may do. All right, so that's the question. Let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi will help us understand, I think, what the Mishnah is saying. If a person, okay, he's focusing, okay, on the first part. If I sell you the field, v'nosalo miktus damim, and you give me part of the money, v'omar lo, and I say, Ein b'sashe tirtza hava Moshe hamos, shalecha v'tol sadeh shaloch. So give me the rest of the money, and the field will belong to you. So Rashi is sort of breaking down specifically what's being said. Says the Mishnah, Osir. Osir lasas kain. It's forbidden. Now, v'dafka de omale l'chi maisis Moshe hamos kona me'achshav. Now, v'dafka specifically, if he says, when you bring me the money, then you own it me'achshav, from now, from the moment you gave me the balance of the money. Lefikach osa lasas kain, therefore you can't do it. So Rashi's adding that, telling us that the specifics of the deal is when you give me the money, then you'll own it. Not lemafreya, which is going to be important because that's going to be a discussion of the Gemara, not from when we transacted 6 months ago, but from now when you gave me the rest of the money. Lefikach also lasas kain, forbidden. Now, what does it center on? It's going to center on an issue which we have really discussed before. What happens to the peiros of the field? Okay, during this interim time, the fruit is going to produce whatever it has, fruits, wheat, whatever it is. So listen to what the Mishnah is saying. The Mishnah is saying, she'im yochel mocher peiros b'toch kach, if the seller eats the peiros during the time that he's waiting for the buyer to pay him, the kishuyava zehamos, when he brings the money, nimshesh hazadeh kanuyalo miyoim hamecher, then he's interjecting and saying, then it will be as if he bought it from the day of the sale, which means not now, but previously. And he's eating the peiros for the time it takes for him to wait, and that's aganater, and that you can't do. That's ribbis. In other words, there's a ribbis component here because you are eating the fruit, and if you're allowed to eat the fruit, it's only because you waited. You're still going to get the full value of your sale, whatever it is, 1,000 zuz, but you get 1,000 zuz plus eating fruit for, let's say, 3 months, 6 months, and that's ribbis. Now, so that's if the seller eats it. Ve'im yochel lokeach, but if the buyer who has only put up the 100 zuz, if he eats peiros ve'achshav, from now, Shem lo yover Moshe hamos. Maybe he won't bring the rest of the money. V'yachzeh lo zeh mashe kibel, and the fellow will return what he took. V'limta shelo hoyse sadeh kanuyolo, and it'll be that the field was never ever transacted. It wasn't bought. D'choli maisis koneh me'achshav, because according to this, the principle is that when you pay it, that's when you own it, not lemafreya. Omalei v'hai loy aisei moshe v'shoros kamalve. So then what does it turn out? It turns out that there wasn't even a sale. So the 100 zuz that the quote buyer gave to the seller was never a sale, it was a loan, right? Why? Because the quote seller has use of the money. Kemilva ba'almahi, etzel mocha, zeh ochel peres b'scharo. So now flipping the script, if the buyer doesn't consummate, then the seller has to give him back the money. But he's had use of the money for a period of time, whatever that period is. So for use of the money, it's no longer a purchase, it's a loan. We consider it not a down payment, but he made him a loan of 100, and only after he pays him the rest does the loan flip into a sale. But before the sale is consummated, it's a loan, and he's eating payros. So therefore, that's ribbis. So
But excuse me, Rabbi, both sides have something unique.
yeah,
The one who's buying has the payros, and the seller has his 10%, whatever it is,
right.
and he can go invest it in as a down payment on another field.
That's correct.
So both of them have a win-win. The way this thing is, no matter how it turns out later.
But what happens if the sale isn't consummated? Once the sale's not consummated, then the buyer what does the buyer have?
Well, he had the use of the money, the down payment money, and the same time as the buyer had got payros. He got something.
So not right. You're correct. So, but that is a loan. He lent him 100 zuz.
Both sides are getting something out of this deal that doesn't make sense.
Well,
I mean, the deal is the Gemara is not interested in this kind of a deal.
No, but understand that it's not less ribbis because one side got something and the other side got something. If ribbis is illegal, remember we're saying that no matter who you are in the chain, you are part of the prohibition of ribbis. So if the seller becomes a lender and the seller loaned him 100 zuz, and the buyer says, "I can't buy this. I have to give you back. You have to give me back the money." So then the question becomes this. Remember, it's the appearance of ribbis.
Excuse me, I'm missing.
This is ribbis.
I'm missing something.
Yeah.
The seller is lending him $100.
No, the seller.
The seller's accepting $100 deposit
As a deposit,
whatever you call it.
right?
All right. And
So now the buyer has to pay him 900 zuz.
he owes him 900, but he gave him 100 already.
He already gave him 100. Now, so Rashi is saying, so the Mishnah is raising the question, what happens to the fruit of the field during the period of time when the buyer has to come up with the other 900 zuz? Says Rashi explaining the Mishnah that the quandary here is that no matter where you turn, there's ribbis. Why? Because if the seller is eating the fruit, then and the buyer comes and pays him the other 900, which is what the deal is, then it appears that the seller is getting more than he bargained for because he's getting payros on top of his money, and that appears to be ribbis.
But the seller,
What's that?
what happens if the buyer gets those payros? Then
No. I'm starting with the seller. If the seller gets the payros, if the seller is eating the payros during the time that he's waiting for the money, and then he finally gets the money, then it falls into the category of what we had explained before. I don't know if you were there, that there's a principle of agar nater, which means that if you wait for your money and you get paid for it, that's ribbis. In other words, a sort of a delayed sale, you have to be very careful because you're getting paid for the delay and it's on top of the sale, so that's ribbis. At least midrabanan, it's ribbis.
Yeah.
That's if the seller eats it. Now, what happens if we say, let the buyer eat it? Okay, the buyer is eating it during this period of time, and that's great because when he pays him the rest of the money, there's no ribbis because he's paid him the rest of the money and he's eating his fruit. But what happens if the buyer recants and says, you know what, I can't go through with the transaction. I don't have the money. It's difficult. So you have to give me my money back. So now the seller says, okay, you want your money back. The seller has had use of the money. So we are saying that that sale, which started as a sale, now flips into a loan because there's no consummation of the transaction. If the deal doesn't close, then the terms change. Then it wasn't a case of a sale and then a non-sale. Says the Mishnah, it's a case of a sale that turns into a loan. And the loan, because it's the seller's property, the mocher is eating ribis, is eating fruit on a loan that becomes ribis. So no matter how you slice it, says the Mishnah, there's a problem. So what the Mishnah is saying is because of the potential problem of ribis, if the deal doesn't go through,
Right.
we're not going to allow the deal to go through. It's an interesting
Yeah,
concept
yeah.
because we don't know what the future is going to hold in the deal. So why are you holding up the deal? The teretz is because the likelihood of ribis, potential ribis, of course, potential ribis is very great. So we won't enter in such a deal in the first place, so not to allow the potential. I'm reminded this has nothing.
Your thing froze, Rabbi.
Yeah, Rabbi froze, and since I can hear you, I know it's not my internet.
To do with it, but
There
I'm
we go.
reminded
It's back.
of a flight, and we all have this. You hear me? Okay, so I go to the airport. I'm about to take a flight. It's beautiful weather in Baltimore, and we're not taking off. So I ask, why are we not taking off? It's a gorgeous day. You know why? Because at the other end, there's a problem, and you not be able to land. Because you can't land, we're not taking off. I said, okay, but we have 3 hours till we get there. It may clear up. The answer I get is we can't go until we know we can land. So I mean, it's a tenuous comparison, but the idea is that the Mishnah is telling us since our circumstances that can present a problem with the eating of the payros during the period of this transaction, we're not going to allow the transaction itself. That's what the Mishnah is telling us, is that you can't do it because of the chashash that there may be. Now, maybe it'll be perfectly fine. Maybe the buyer will consummate the deal. The buyer will eat the fruit. It's his fruit, and he'll consummate the deal, and then there's no ribis. Why don't we suggest that? So anyway, so the Mishnah is telling us here that you have to be very, very careful in this circumstance, and that's why it's forbidden to make such a deal. Now, let's look at the second half of the okay, Rashi doesn't talk about it, but the second half of this Mishnah tells us specifically not about a sale, because in the first part of the Mishnah, the problem is that the sale may become a loan and the loan will have ribis. There's not really ribis on a sale, but because the terms will change and the meicher will become a malver, the seller will become a malver, therefore there's a potential of ribis. In the second case, it's a straight out loan. He loaned him money and he took the field as security, right? The field had nothing directly to do with the loan. The loan was the loan, and he gave him security of field. But he made a condition, and the condition was that you have to repay me not open-ended. You have to repay me within 3 years. Okay, if he pays in, no problem. If he doesn't, then he gets the field. So here the question is not is there ribis in the actual transaction. The question is if he takes the field because the fellow didn't give him the rest of the money and the field is worth more than the loan, that's ribis. It's clear cut. He's making a transaction for 1,000 zuz, and he's going to wind up receiving 2,000 zuz because the collateral is much more expensive. That's ribis.
Rabbi,
So yet the Mishnah says you can do it. We don't have ribis. Yeah, Michael.
I want to go back to, we've discussed this before. If you, so not making the deal now puts the owner in limbo. If you charged the fee, if you converted that money, instead of saying it's a loan, but it's a fee to postpone the deal until a certain time. So you're buying the right to decide at a future date. And then you address the ownership of the fruit, the payros, during that interim period.
Right.
Can you get around ribis from that notion that there is if I have to wait, then there is a cost for me not waiting. If I wanted to sell now, I could get it, but I'm deferring to you. So if you buy it, then this is by the date, it's the price, but it's a fee to wait, and you lose the money if you wait. So we don't say it's a loan, but it's a fee. Can you get around ribis with that kind of structure?
Except that, Michael, the way you're presenting it, there is a halacha, and maybe if you remember, there's a halacha called ager nater. Ager nater means a fee for waiting, and a fee for waiting is considered ribis. There is such a thing. I mean, you're presenting a situation where
I don't
where
remember that.
I'm going to wait, and as a result of my waiting, I'm getting a fee, i.e., the fruit. So ager nater is forbidden. Why? Because it seems like that's extra outside of the transaction. The transaction was 1,000 zuz. I gave you 100. I owe you 900. You're eating fruit. You'll get your 900. You'll be happy. I'll be happy. But in the meantime, you got not 1,000 plus the value of the fruit. That's ribis.
Well, it's a variation on that. If I buy it, the fee is part of the purchase price. If I don't buy it, then it's paying you for the eating of the fruit during the waiting period. So it's not, you're saying that I'll forego the fee if the transaction goes through because it's a down payment, but because I had to wait and you got to eat the fruit during that time period, that's a fee that you're paying to eat the fruit, but you've nixed the deal.
Who ate the fruit?
What?
Is it the buyer or the seller that ate the fruit?
The buyer in this case.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So I don't understand why you cannot. So you're not charging him any more in that deal. You're saying it's gonna be the same price. But if you retract the deal, and I have the rights to the fruit during the period, I have a 6-month leeway to make the decision. But if I pull out, then the fee is going to be for eating the fruit. If I buy it, then the fee goes away and is part of the purchase price.
All right. So Michael, what you're saying is that the problem here is there's an ambiguity. And the Mishnah says we don't like ambiguities. What does that mean? That because we have conditions to a deal, you're right, Michael. There may well be a valid transaction at the end of the day, and there will be no problem. But there is a potential problem, says the Mishnah, because if the deal doesn't go through, it's not consummated, then what you've done is you've taken ribis,
No, you've charged me a fee for eating the fruit during the period that it was in limbo.
No. But you have a down payment. You have my money, which you've been using. Now, if it was straightforward, I would agree with you. But in the meantime, the seller has money that he is doing business with.
Right.
And if the deal consummates, that's fine. But if the buyer retracts, then that 1,000, which was going to be a down payment for a sale, says the Mishnah, reverts. It flips into a loan. The Mishnah considers it to be a loan.
But it's not. It's a right to eat the fruit during the period that it's in limbo. So I'm paying you for using for getting the fruit as a fee during the period that I haven't decided yet. And if I decide to purchase it, the fee goes away and it's part of the purchase price. So it's not.
And if I don't, and if I don't buy it,
if I don't buy it, then it's the money that I've paid down is considered paying for the produce, for eating the produce during that period.
So
Okay,
you're saying the buyer is eating the fruit.
the buyer is
Right?
eating,
I'm saying the
the
buyer is
buyer,
eating the fruit.
the
The
buyer's eating
buyer
the fruit.
says, okay, I'm going to give you $1,000 down. I have the right to all the fruit here during this period while I make up my mind. And if I end up buying it at the end of the 6-month period,
No
then
problem.
that is rolled into the total price. But otherwise, it's a payment for purchasing the fruit during the interim period. So I'm paying for the fruit. It's a sale of the fruit during that interim
Okay,
period.
You're adding a fruit sale in the middle of this whole
No,
contract.
I'm saying it is a fruit sale. So if I'm going to buy it, then since the rabbis don't like to make a future transaction, you're saying that if the deal consummates, I've made the deal retroactive to the first day, and I'm paying that price. So
right,
I've bought it and I've consummated the transaction, as Rabbi Grauman said, that they don't have a problem with that because you've made the deal.
right.
But if I decide not to make the deal and I'm going to eat the fruit while I'm waiting, then the down payment is equivalent to the amount of money that I would pay you for the fruit during that interim time period. So essentially, I bought the fruit from you during that time period.
But the Mishnah doesn't want to consider it. See, that's where you're saying, okay, I bought the fruit. It's not a problem. The Mishnah is saying, no, we do not treat that fruit as being bought and paid for. We're saying that the sale never happened, so that 1,000, the money transferring was a loan. Now it becomes a classic case of a loan, which then has to be repaid. And on top of the repayment, there's an additional benefit of eating the fruit.
But see, you've eliminated the loan. It's not a loan if the only way it's a loan is by
Michael,
purchase.
if I have to repay you because I didn't buy it, the Mishnah says that is a loan. We consider that a
No,
loan.
we're saying it's you don't have so you don't have to repay the seller does not have to repay it because the buyer is buying the fruit, the rights to the fruit, if it decides that it's not going to complete the transaction.
Okay, that's I understand what you were looking at. You're looking at saying that the transaction will become a straight purchase of 1,000
Right.
zuz.
So
Right.
you've so it's if
But
it's
the
a
seller
loan
has
if
to
you're
give him
buying
back.
it, huh?
But the seller has to give him back the money.
No,
No, no,
no.
the Mishnah is telling us if I retract and say that I can't buy it, you have to give me back the
No,
money. You're saying I don't because of
no,
the
no. I'm saying the transaction is if I'm going to purchase the property, it's a loan. If I don't purchase the property, I'm selling you fruit. So it's one or the other. So if it's a loan, I have the right to use the money because you're going to buy it. But if I don't, then I'm buying the fruit from you. So it's a sales transaction. So it's no longer a loan in that context. But if you go through with the purchase, it is a loan.
okay.
It obviates the problem of ribis.
Right, but your facts are not the facts of our Mishnah. You're saying, and I hear clearly what you're saying, is that if the deal doesn't go through, then the 100 zuz that he gave him is for eating the fruit during this period of time, and there's no problem. The problem with that is that the Mishnah, those facts are not the facts of the Mishnah. The Mishnah's facts are that if the deal doesn't go through, you can't you can't equal the 100 zuz for the fruit because the seller must return the money. He can't hold on to the money as in your scenario where he's holding on to it for the fruit. He must return the money. Now, if you have to return the money and this fellow's been eating fruit improperly, that's ribis. Yes, in your circumstance, if we can say hypothetically that the seller is now going to keep the 100 zuz and is going to say, you ate 100 zuz worth of fruit, let's call it a day and we're even. No problem. I agree with you. But that's not what the Mishnah is saying. The Mishnah is saying that, in fact, if the deal can't go through, the buyer is entitled to his money back. He can't just say, keep my money for the fruit that I ate. That he doesn't want. He wants his money back. Ah, but he's been eating fruit all this time. That's a problem because eating the fruit would now appear to be a bonus for having conveyed 100 zuz to the quote seller so that he could use it. But now he's not a seller, he's a lender. So for lending the money, for giving him the money, he received a benefit. That benefit is ribis. So it's a different fact pattern than yours, Michael.
Well, I was saying I was trying to get around ribis. So I'm saying
No,
if
no.
you
You can get
structured it,
no. You're 100% right. Your case gets around ribis. I agree with you. Your
so
case,
so if you structured it that way, would the rabbis be okay with that? If you said if it's a purchase, it's a loan. If it's not, if you decide not to purchase it, you're buying fruit.
if the terms of agreement, yes, if the terms were agreement where it was spelled out the way you're presenting the case, the rabbis would not have a problem with it because at that point it becomes a sale of a sale of fruit for the amount. But the case of the Mishnah doesn't contemplate that. It doesn't contemplate that they made a deal. What
I
happens if?
understand, but I'm saying they're worried about ribis. If they structured it, I was trying to come up with
No,
a
no,
way
your
to
structure.
circumvent
Yeah,
ribis by
I agree. No, I agree with you. Your structure opens the way for saying that there shouldn't be ribis. But the way the Mishnah presents it, there is the potential for ribis, and on the potential alone, you can't make the deal. Now, if there was a caveat in the deal that said, look, if this deal goes south, then let's just consider it a sale for the fruit that you ate, and we'll both be happy. I agree. If that caveat was in the deal, then you would avoid. That's a case where you would avoid ribis because then you have a straight transaction. But the Mishnah doesn't present that. The Mishnah presents a case where either I'm going to buy it or I'm not going to buy it. And if I don't buy it, you have to give me my money back. So if you give me my money back, then it will appear not to have been a sale, even though it started out as a sale. It will appear to have been a loan. And on a loan, you can't take ribis. So this is going to create the problem, says the Mishnah. That's why we can't enter into transaction in the first place, because now what I mean, there's a way around this. We'll see what the Gemara says. But now, but by the way, this circumstance would not apply if I'm selling you a barren field. Let's say I'm selling you a field on Har Eval. Har Eval is a barren mountain. It doesn't have any potential for food. None. I'm selling you a barren field. Then the circumstances change because there's no hava amina that there's going to be a problem with produce. The problem why this deal can't be done is because there's a potential problem for produce, and the Tanoim are saying we don't want to enter into that can of worms. Of having produce, who does it belong to, depending on when the deal is consummated. That's too much for us. We just want a straight deal. So the Mishnah is giving us an example where if the nature of the deal is the way the Mishnah posits it, and there's the possibility of produce, no deal. It doesn't get off the ground because it could potentially not work out on the other end. It doesn't get off the ground. Your case is clearly a legitimate case of no
Which would
ribis,
get
Michael.
around. So, like you said, Rabbi, even if it has the appearance up front that it could be ribis, it's ribis, so you can't make that deal. So, if you
Correct.
want to make that kind of a deal, structuring it the way I suggested would,
Structure it differently, and then there won't be ribis.
Right.
Exactly. So, and by the way, without the whole principle of heter iska is a fee. In other words, we're structuring it, and when we do the heter iska, we say it's a fee regardless of what happens, and that fee can be paid, quote unquote, outside of the transaction. Therefore, it's not ribis. That's the principle of a heter iska.
Rabbi, I want one other follow-up question because what I don't understand is the rabbi's notion that the sale has to be retroactive. So if I mean we can't pay interest, but if let's say in this case the buyer put money in an investment put money into an investment vehicle with the seller.
Yeah.
And said, for as long as you're holding this money, I'm going to agree to, I'll make a decision in 6 months whether to buy it. I'm going to give you this money as an investment in, in something else you're doing. So I'm going to be a partner with you and I get a return. If I decide to buy it, I'm going to apply the whole proceeds that it's worth at that time toward the purchase. Would they allow the purchase to be effective down the road? What I don't understand is that the concept of delaying the purchase until the transaction consummates is not part of the notion of the Chachamim. They want the deal to be retroactive, which is what their problem is. But if you're using the money and investing it until a certain time, and then I want to cash that out at whatever its value is and apply it toward the purchase at XYZ time, then the purchase clearly takes place then. So I just don't understand why, if you have you have an option to buy, that it has to take place at the time you commit to the option, not when the actual purchase takes place. So why can't you invest that and not treat it as a loan? I mean, the obvious thing is you're getting a benefit of using someone's money and for nothing. So the idea is to try to make it so that you're not using it for nothing. They earn on it, and then the transaction takes place when they decide it, when the option runs out.
Okay. So you're presenting a different set of facts. And if I understand what you're asking that if the buyer puts down the 100 and says, I'll let you know down the road what I want to do, and the 100 that I give you
Is not a loan.
it's not a loan. I want you, he's telling him, so you have use of my money, okay?
Right.
You have use of my money, but I want to be a partner with you in that money, so that if that money produces income, then I should share that income with you. That's
Correct.
right. That's the fact.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Right. So the question is, if he goes through with the purchase, and we're not talking about Paris or anything, right? We're
Right.
talking about,
We're not
okay,
talking payros.
right. So there's no pay. So the question is the use of the money for which the buyer is going to get value, is that like Paris? In other words, Paris we know is a problem. But the question is the money that he had put into the seller for which he will receive a return, i.e. Paris, he's going to
Right.
get Paris. Is that considered to be, and now he goes through with the deal. He goes through with the deal.
Yep.
So he now he goes through with the deal. So he now owns the property, right?
Yep.
And there's no quote unquote loan compulsion. It's not a loan. It's a straight sale. So is there ribis because on top of the 1,000 zuz that he's going to pay for the land, he just made an additional, let's call it 100 zuz, if that was
Yeah.
the amount that he gets from the profit, and that profit
Goes back to him, but goes back to the buyer.
goes back to the buyer. So it would seem that the principle of ager nater, which is that for waiting for the deal to consummate, I'm going to get paid. How am I going to get paid? I'm going to get paid because I'm going to get something I didn't bargain for.
Well,
Okay.
I'm investing to try to earn a return. In essence,
Yes. So investing to get a return, that's what clouds the picture, because that takes it now to another step, because it's saying it's not a straight transaction. 1,000 zuz for a property, 100 now, 900 later. it's 100 now, 900 later, plus I'm going to earn something on my money
Right.
that you're holding in the meantime.
Right.
So that again, that's what poses the question as to whether or not we consider that extra 100 zuz, whatever it is that he gets from the investment, is that is that ribis because is that ribis because he benefited from the fact that the deal didn't consummate right away. It happened later. So that falls into the agronator principle, which is that you get paid for waiting, and getting paid for waiting is ribis.
Yeah, but
That's
you're
the
not, it's
outline of the
not a
question.
guarantee you're going to get paid. You may lose the money in the trade. I mean, it's an investment. So you may earn and you may not earn.
Right, right. But again, we know that the Tanoim um, were more restrictive when a deal could go either way. In other words, if the deal could go up or down, the Tanoim said, we don't like that circumstances because if it can go up or down, that means that on one side there may be ribis, one side there may not be ribis, and we worry about that. Now, the Gemara is going to define this for us a little bit more so that your question may have an answer once we learn the Gemara. I'm just saying that at this point, the Tanoim of the Mishnah were very restrictive. They were very specific that we don't want even the chashash ribbis. We don't want, we don't want any deal that could potentially give ribbis is a ribbis deal. It may not happen, and maybe the odds are seriously against it happening. But the Mishnah is saying because it could happen, we don't want to go down that road. That's what this portion of the Mishnah is telling us. Now, again, we need to go a little bit further to unravel this a little bit more. But accept that for now, Michael, because I think we're going to revisit the question a little bit later, and we're going to see how that Gemara may answer the question. But at this point in time, the uncertainty of whether a deal is consummated or not doesn't allow for a deal to be made. And that's a broad brush painting that the Tanoim is saying. Gemara is going to say something different, but the Tanoim is saying once it's open ended, cannot make the deal.
So they're assuming it's a high risk, and others are saying no, it's not a high risk, and you're worrying too much. Two different views.
Yeah, no, I mean, from the Mishnah standpoint, we're not even considering the risk. We're considering the possibility that the deal may never happen. And if the deal doesn't happen, you're left holding the bag of having eaten fruit, which we now cast as a loan, not a sale. And you're attaching a benefit to the loan because the loan has to be repaid. And it's going to be repaid, and he will have eaten the fruit. That's a clear case of ribis. I mean, so in other words, there's no ambiguity on the ribis if the deal doesn't happen. And because it's possible the deal won't happen, we won't allow it. So that's the two-step process that the Mishnah is taking here. It's a very restrictive process, very restrictive view, but the Mishnah, the Tanoim hold out that we don't want to enter into that realm at all to allow for the possibility of ribis. That's why I say some of these cases become not just a regular case of ribis. You got to first look at all the facts to see how the facts will play out, and will they play out for it to be ribis or not. So the uncertainty is what makes it happen. Now, in the second half of the Mishnah, it's a different circumstance. There's no uncertainty. He makes it very clear. I give you 3 years to repay the loan. No question about it. I'm not getting anything during the 3 years. You're not giving me any benefit, no ribis, nothing. There, what the potential problem is that the collateral is worth more than the loan. So if after 3 years, the fellow doesn't give him the money, the seller takes the land. But if he takes the land, everyone's going to say, wait a minute, you're getting ribis. You're getting 2,000 worth zuz for a property that's 1,000 zuz. Says the Mishnah, no, that's not the case. Why? Because the buyer entered into a arm's length transaction where he said, I'm giving you this land. This is the collateral. He didn't bargain and say, oh, if I default, you owe me money because the land is worth more. He was so sure he was going to buy it that he gave him the land as collateral. We have cases like that all the time where the collateral is worth more than the loan, but the collateral. Now, what this turns out to be is that the Mishnah is telling us with certainty, don't be frivolous when you make a deal and say, oh, I'm giving you this as collateral, and then later on to say, I didn't mean to give you this collateral. It's worth far more than the loan. Don't do that. This is a warning to borrowers that when you make a deal at the outset, make sure the deal is what you want to make. In other words, don't give them a property that's worth twice as much as the loan. Once you do that and you agree to it, you're stuck. So the Mishnah is saying that that is not considered ribis because you went into a deal that there was no ribis in the deal. It's just when the deal fell through at the end, the seller walked away with more money, and that's not ribis. So anyway,
Rabbi, can I just on that point, if why wouldn't the rabbis disallow that transaction? Because the potential is that that's the collateral. It's more than what's worth. If he doesn't pay the loan, there's potential for ribis on the seller side because he would get a windfall that was not there. Why would they allow that transaction?
So this is the chiddush that the Mishnah is telling us that in this case, the seller didn't press the buyer, give me. He said, I want this field. The buyer could have said, you know what, that's too much collateral. This field is worth far more than the loan. Let's negotiate. In other words, the borrower or the borrower had it in front of him, and he could have made any deal he made. The lesson here is you make a deal, that's the deal. In the first half of the Mishnah, there's an uncertainty whether he'll make the deal or not, and he's taking something during the term of the loan that would look like ribis. But when there is nothing in the term of the loan that suggests ribis, but there is an agreement to to repay a loan, and you don't repay, and as a result of the not repaying, I keep the collateral, then that collateral was agreed upon arm's length at the beginning. So you can't now say that's ribis because we agreed that that would be the deal. It's only when you have an uncertainty of what will happen and you're basically, quote unquote, potentially eating ribis along the way, that's when the problem arises. But if it doesn't arise because it's a straightforward deal, and then I entered into the deal knowing that my collateral is worth more than the loan, says the Gemara. Again, this is the Mishnah's point: is that you better make sure that the deal you strike is the deal you strike, and not later come back and say, "I didn't mean to give you the whole collateral. It's worth far more." That's what you should have said at the outset. So,
Rabbi, is that because it's land? Because we were always worried, about goods, about price gouging, because there was a market for prices, and if it went outside the market, then so is this because it's land that it's an exception?
Metaltalin wouldn't work the same way, though, would it, Rabbi?
Yeah. Let's hold on a second.
Michael, you're at full power today.
So, okay. So I'm sorry. Ask me the question again.
So, go ahead, Jake. Go ahead.
Look, this is all. Michael's question is whether this is because it's land. Metaltalin wouldn't have the same kind of story here.
We're worried about price gouging. There's a market for metaltalin. Because of land, is that why it's an exception? Because land is collateral. If it was something else, would we worry about the fact that the market value would be, too high, so therefore, it wouldn't be that way? And it's just because you're giving land as collateral that's the exception.
I'm not sure it's because of the land as opposed to something else, but there's another concept. There's another concept that we didn't talk about that enters into this picture. So, in other words, we have the facts, um, but when you have ribis that looks like ribis, but it's not really ribis because it's a penalty for doing business. In other words, I lent you the money and you have to return the money in a specific period of time. And if you don't return it, then you're penalized because I get your property. So that kind of ribis is what the Chachamim have sort of carved out as an exception, that ribis isn't really truly ribis because it's not as if, again, to distinguish it from the first half where you're getting the fruit and yes and no, it's a one-time circumstance, right? It's not over the term. It's a one-time circumstance. And because you didn't fulfill your part of the bargain, I'm entitled to um, take the land which we agreed upon originally would be the quote penalty, would be the penalty for not returning the loan on time. And that is a carve out, as we'll see more in the Gemara. But that's the Mishnah is basically telling us that that's a carve out where you're not getting ribis because you're getting more than the value because that's the penalty for doing business. So we don't consider it ribis in the classical sense. We consider it money that you have to pay as a penalty, and therefore ribis doesn't apply. That's the underlying thinking of of the Tanoim in this part of the Mishnah. So the argument that I'm making a windfall because I lent you 1,000 and I'm getting back a property for 2,000 doesn't hold because we agreed. And by agreeing, in other words, there's two things here. The Chazal, the Amoraim, I mean, the Tanoim didn't want people to enter into business, make deals, and at the end of the deal, recant and say, no, I didn't mean to give you this full land as collateral. I meant you to give you part of it. That's one thing. In other words, you make a deal, you got to stick with the deal, and that's the deal going forward. So that's one part. The second part is that in fact you're being penalized for not fulfilling your end of the bargain, which is to repay the loan, and that penalty is the field, and that can't be considered ribis. So I think there's two ways of looking at this particular case in the Mishnah and why it should not be considered ribis, because once you entered into the deal, you can't recant. You can't recant. You can't come back and say later, that's not what I meant. That would, you know what? That would put all transactions into jeopardy because no one would make deals anymore. Like we've said many a time, there has to be a certain certainty. I lend you money. I want my money back. You don't give me the money back. I have collateral. I'll take it. But then you don't start negotiating at the end of the deal. The collateral I gave you isn't really a collateral. It's only, you should only take part of it as collateral. This is what the Tanoim are trying to avoid in the course of commerce, that we shouldn't have all this ambiguity. And we know from our previous discussions that Mekach Memker was a very important consideration by the Tanoim and later the Amoraim as to whether or not we're making laws that will chill commerce. And we didn't want to do that. In this particular case, Michael, we've been chilling commerce because we'll undo a deal at the end that was negotiated fairly at the beginning. So there isn't that same sort of ambiguity what's going to happen. We know clearly what's going to happen. You either repay the loan or give me the collateral because that's what was pledged. So I think it's a different circumstance than the first half of the mission. And again, the Gemara will elaborate more, but at least for our purposes, I think we can draw a line between the first half of the Mishnah and the second half of the Mishnah even though there's a lot going on here, and understand that the first half of the Mishnah creates uncertainties that the Tanoim didn't want to happen, therefore don't make the deal. And in the second half of the Mishnah, there is no uncertainty. There is definite certainty. But if the certainty appears to be ribis, says the Tanoim, it's not ribis because the parties agreed at the outset. And if you agree at the outset, you can't have ribis because you made more money than the loan itself was worth. That was the deal. And again, these are the principles of Heter Iska that later on the Achronim, specific Achronim, said, you know what? We're going to create a carve out so that certain monies that trade hands on top of a deal shouldn't be considered ribas. And if you look at it, this is that kind of deal. I mean, this wasn't the Heteriska, but this is that kind of a deal where there was an agreement, and the fact that I get 200 zuz or a collateral worth far more, let's say, than my loan, that's the price for doing business, which the principals agreed to. So again, I understand the ambiguity, but it's not. So let's just take a pause on the Mishnah. Let's learn a little bit of the Gemara in a few minutes, and we'll have to revisit this once we understand what the Gemara is telling us. So now, all right. So we've said that
Rabbi, can you move your screen, your camera somehow, or tilt it so we can see you?
Is that better?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
The problem I have is that my picture is totally covered by writing. Menashe, mine says this meeting is being recorded is squarely on my face.
Yeah, and you should be able to, that meeting is recorded, should have like an X in it on it to close it.
Hold
somewhere.
on.
Or an OK.
Or an OK or something.
I don't see it. Okay, I'll have to look for it later. Okay, but that's the problem. The problem is that I can't even see
Don't
my
see
face.
yourself.
I can't see my face. But okay, I
Well, now we can see your face, so that's
you
good.
can see mine. I can't see mine. Okay, all right. So that's the Mishnah. Now, Frek the Gemara. Okay, now the Gemara is going to introduce a slightly different case than the Mishnah. So we're talking about a case where, again, a sale, and the seller received money from the sale, and he has to be paid the balance within, let's say Shloshim Shonim, whatever it is. Now, the Gemara's case is different than the Mishnah because in the Mishnah's case, if the deal doesn't fall, if the deal falls through, he gets collateral. The Gemara's case is different. The Gemara's case is, I'm selling it to you. You're giving me a down payment, right? You can't fulfill the down payment. The deal is nullified, and you get your money back. That's not the case of the Mishnah. Mishnah's case was different. So here, the Gemara wants to introduce a different circumstance. And then, based on that, what do we do with the produce? In other words, the same question the Mishnah asked, but a different fact pattern. Frek the Gemara mi ochel peris. In that circumstance where the field would go back to the owner, who eats the peris, right? So Rav Huna Omar.
This is not the collateral field.
No, not the collateral. Not the collateral. So in this Gemara, we have a defined machlokes. So listen to this. Rav Huna Omar, that Rav Huna says, Mocher ochel peris, that while the sale is up in the air and it hasn't been consummated, the mocher, the seller, can eat the peris. Okay, we'll see in a minute. And Ravanan Omar, and Ravanan says, wait a minute, Mishalshanas a peris. I have a chiddush here. Why is this a question? Put it in the hands of a third person. Mishalshanas a peris, right? Let a third person, an escrow is what we're talking about. Let an escrow agent hold the peris, And once we know if the deal is going to be consummated or not, he'll give it to the right person. If it's consummated, he'll give it to the mocher, to the buyer. And if it's not consummated, he'll give it back to the mocher. So we have a clear-cut distinction in this particular case of the Gemara, a machlekes between two amaroim. So that's the difference. This case now doesn't translate to the case of the Mishnah, which is the Tanoim who were discussing it. This is Amoraim who saw the case of the Mishnah and they want to extrapolate a little bit further. So in this particular case, they say, no, there's a machlekes. So l'chayra, Rav Huna and Rav Anan are taking different sides here. Says the Gemara lo pligi. There is not a disagreement between the two Amoraim. Why? Hod Omer Lechi Maisis Kenei. When Rav Huna says that the mocher gets the produce during the interim, what does he say? He says, when you pay me, then the land will be yours from the time you pay me, not lemafreya. In other words, the whole problem of mocher ochel peres is if the deal is consummated, then the mocher will have eaten the buyer's peres because it'll be retroactive. Rav Huna is saying no. It's not retroactive. When you give me the rest of the money, then you will own it, right? But up until that point in time, I, the mocher, am still the owner of the peres. Therefore, the peres clearly belong to me until you make a decision to buy it. So this case is split up because of a different fact pattern. In the Mishnah, we were talking about retroactive purchase, and therefore we declared who eats the peres because there could be ribbis. But in the case of the Gemara, the Amoraim, Rav Huna is saying, no, I'm not agreeing that it's a purchase lemafreya. I'm saying when you give me the money, that's when you own it. It could be 6 months after you gave me the down payment. For that 6 months, I, the mocher, still own it. No problem. So that's why Rav Huna says you can. Now, why does Rav Anan say you give it to a shlish? When Rav Anan says we put it in escrow, then he's saying no. He's taking a different position. When you give the money, then the sale will be consummated from the day you gave me the deposit, retroactive. So the machlokes between Rav Huna and Rav Anan is whether or not giving the money as a deposit is considered to be a deposit but not a transfer of ownership, or according to Rav Anan, it's not a transfer of ownership. Ownership will still go to the buyer if he pays the money. Therefore, it's the case that falls back into the case of the Mishnah. Wait a minute, what's going to happen here? What's going to happen here? Who's going to eat the peres? I can't give it to the mocher, and I can't give it to the lokeach. That's why Rav Anan introduces the fact of Mishalshanas Peres. Now, you might want to ask, why didn't the Tanoim do the same thing? Why didn't the Tanoim say, you know what? We're gonna make a distinction here. We're gonna say we don't have to worry about it. We'll put it in escrow, and however the deal shakes out, that's what's going to happen. But the Tanoim didn't want to do that. The Tanoim didn't want to muddy the water and say, oh, we're going to give it to a third party and that third party will hold it. The Tanoim were, they were laser focused. They focused on the deal and said, a deal is a deal. If you have ambiguities in the deal, we don't like that.
You have another interesting question, because when the field is being worked and the payros are being taken off the trees, from the outside, nobody knows what the status of the deal was. The deal becomes somewhat public because people talk.
Right.
And people are working the field. They're taking down the payros. So is there a reason that people will think, well, you're allowed to have the fruit, and then other people might think, no, it still belongs to the seller.
Yeah, well, clearly that is a consideration. Is that how will people view the halacha here,
Yeah.
and what is the halacha? I mean, the truth of the matter is that we're first and foremost concerned of potential ribbis. Okay, but secondarily, we are concerned that people will look at this and then question whether or not there is ribbis, regardless of whether indeed it is or isn't ribbis, so that you and I, as the transaction partners, are not over
We know
ribbis.
the truth. We know
Right,
the truth.
right. But someone else looking at the deal
Right.
will then be confused. What's ribbis? What's not ribbis? Is this okay? Is it not okay? So the machlokes between Rav Huna and Rav Anan isn't a machlokes because they're dealing with different facts. And so the Mishnah is saying, one would agree to the other. In other words, Rav Anan wouldn't have a problem agreeing with Rav Huna if Rav Huna's fact pattern was what we're talking about. But Rav Anan says, no, we're not talking about that. We're talking about a situation where the deal would be consummated lemafreya from the very beginning. And if it's consummated from the beginning, then we're in the realm of the case that the Tanoim brought, and therefore Rav Anan is mechadesh. The Tanoim said no deal. I'm saying there is a deal, but put it in the hands of an escrow agent. So in other words, we've advanced a little bit in our thinking is that we can make a deal, but we have to add a layer. The Tanoim didn't want to add the layer. That's really what the point is the Tanoim said it's ambiguous, no deal. The Ramanan comes and says, no, we can still make such a deal, but we have to bring in a shlish. We have to bring in an escrow. Now, of course, fruit can decay and rot, so he has to sell it. In other words, we're still talking about the whether it's money or goods. There is what to consider. It doesn't have to be the fruit itself; it could be money. But Rav Huna's case, where he says mocha ochel, it's simply because it was in his ownership scope up until the time he gave him the rest of the deposit. So that's an interesting question. And by the way, that's a question that's relevant to us today, is when two people transact, how are they transacting? In other words, is the transaction does it really happen when the deposit is paid, when the balance is paid, or does it happen when the deposit is made? That's a big inyan, because one obviates the problem that the other presents. If the mocher is eating it, and the deal goes lemafreya, then how could Huna argue that the mocher can eat the pears? Rav Huna wouldn't say the mocha eats the pears, but his fact pattern is different. He's saying, I don't agree with you in principle that a deposit makes a deal. It's a placeholder, but it doesn't make the deal. The deal only happens when you give me the balance, and therein lies the chiddush that Rav Huna is saying, is that I don't agree that the deposit makes the deal. Now, again,
that allows for more commerce if you say it doesn't make the deal, the deposit.
Right. Now, we have what's called a layaway. Who owns a layaway? I give you $100 towards the purchase of an item, and it's a layaway. Does it belong to me? It doesn't belong to me, right? It'll belong to me when I pay you the other balance for the item. So in such a case, there can't be ribbis if you, the seller, have some benefit from the item, because it's my item. I can do what I want with it.
Still his item, yeah.
Now, you may be achroi, you may be responsible to the buyer if you damage the item before the buyer has a chance to purchase it. That's a whole other issue of whether or not you have a chrayas, whether or not you're responsible or not. But the chilik here in the Gemara's case is whether or not we say retroactive purchase can happen. All right, so we'll stop here, but there's a lot more to discuss, and I think a lot of the questions we talked about today may become clearer once we get further into the Gemara and understand the Gemara's position. But for our discussion, what you have to really think about is that the Tanoim had a different mindset going into these cases than the Amoraim. The Amoraim had the benefit of seeing what their predecessors had done, and of course they can't upend what the Tanoim, what they said stands. But they said, so wait a minute, okay, you're telling me that this is something that is a problem. I understand. So we're going to try to get around the problem. Now, the Tanoim may not have been around to field the question because there was a couple hundred-year gap here. So some of the Achrayim, some of the Amoraim, if they had an opportunity, they might have asked the Tanoim, why didn't you consider a shlish?
Right. Yeah.
Why didn't you consider an escrow agent, whether or not that was something that would have alleviated your concern about ribbis? And the Tanoim might have answered, maybe yes, or maybe we don't want to muddy the waters. In other words, we don't want to have, it's between me and you, right? A meicher and a lokeach, a buyer and a seller. And
Keep it
therefore,
simple.
what's that?
Keep it simple.
Keep it simple. Exactly. So that's really the role here is, but the Amoraim had the benefit of seeing what the Tanoim said and being able to build on it. Remember, what we say la halacha is the later in time that we have a decision, that's the decision we hold by. In other
Yeah.
words, at the end of the day, when the Mechaber of the Shulchan Aruch made all the halachas, of course the Tanoim made a halacha at the time of the Tanoim, but since you had the Amoraim, then the Rishonim and the Achrayim, the closer we get to where we are today, the greater the impact of what the halacha should be. So we don't say, oh, the Tanoim said it, therefore it supersedes everything that happened in the ensuing generations. That's not how we learn halacha. The way we learn halacha is that we understand what the early Tanoim and Amoraim were saying, but we built on it. Now, Heter Iska wasn't around at the time of the Tanoim. There wasn't any wiggle room. Yet Hester Iska is a halacha in Shulchan Aruch, right? Shulchan Aruch tells us that you can make certain transactions and not what appears to be ribbis is not ribbis. But we wouldn't have said that if we said, wait a minute, the Tanoim didn't say that. So we have to understand that. We have to understand that the later in time, the greater the impact on the halacha. And therefore, what the Gemara is saying here, this machlokis between Rav Huna and Rav Hanan, it's a valid machlokes, notwithstanding what the Tanoim had said earlier. All right. Anyway, it's a wonderful discussion because it really fleshes out a lot of concepts that we're talking about as far as ribbis. So, Mitzvah next week we'll pick up from here and we'll go further.